Are live. Thank you for joining us. It is November 2nd, which is a little bit hard to believe, 2023. And this is the Transportation Committee for the Sacramento Area Council of Governments. Welcome all. If you would join me first with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Madam Clerk, would you take roll call, please?
Thank you. Good morning, Director Branscombe.
Yes, ma'am.
Chapman.
Here.
Goff.
Yes.
Early for Guerrero. Absent Jennings.
Here.
Joyner.
Here.
Lauren. Absent Sander. Absent Vice Chair Soon.
Here.
Here.
And ex officio member Joe Hall for Benny Paul.
Here.
There's some information.
Well, welcome everyone. Our first item is public communications, and it's an opportunity for anyone to address the committee on any item that is not on the agenda. And is there any public comment at this time?
There is a public comment, Chair Gallardo. It's related to item 5. That was my mistake earlier. I can read it now or wait for item 5, whichever you prefer.
You know what? Let's wait for item 5 then when it's with that item. Perfect. Perfect. And no other public comment?
There's no other public comment.
Before we start, because we're still in this working to know each other just a little bit better. So very short and sweet. But the question of the icebreaker of the day for me this morning is, let me know, dog, cat, neither, or both. And I'm going to start with Director Joyner because you're at the top of the screen.
So if you're asking what we have, it's none at the moment. There's a big story behind that with Lisa losing a pet and never wanting to go through that again. But I'm a former rancher. I've had horses, dogs, cattle, all the rest.
So do you get to replace this pet then? Are you there? Are you thinking about it?
I'm coaxing her along. There's a what do they call it? Sheepadoodle out there that she thinks is pretty cute.
Oh, that's the first step. You got a toe in the door.
There you go.
Director Branscombe, are you a dog person, a cat person?
I've had both and love them both. My boys have always had dogs, but I cannot remember not having a cat. And right now I'm hosting a cat that comes in and sleeps with me, and another one that I wouldn't let in the house, but I do feed.
Oh, perfect. See, we're learning a little bit more already. Let's see. Hey, Josh, are you? There you go. I'm going along the top of the screen, so I got you.
Yeah. Good morning. I'm both. I currently have 2 dogs and a cat. So growing up, I have 5 siblings. My parents never let us have pets because they had enough kids to take care of. So I'm constantly filling my house with pets. So both, all the above.
I understand that. I have a giant Christmas tree because Mom always had a little one, so I have to have the giant one. I get it. All right, Lynette, we're going down this way.
Oh, I am both. I like all creatures, great and small.
You're too easy. Eric.
2 kids, no pets.
You took the easy way out, clearly. How about Zach?
Good morning. We have
Definitely a dog person.
Oh,
All right. You can tell us what kind?
I have a rescue dog that's a little 12-pound dog that we rescued about 2 years ago, I think it is now. We have no idea what breed he is, though, or even how old he is. So
That's perfect. Director Gog, I think you were ready.
yes, good morning. We have, we live in town and my mom lives at the farm and I take care of both houses. So, we have a dog that stays with us in town, and then we have cats that stays with us on the farm. We got about 4 cats out there. They do a great job keeping the rats out of the machinery. They look over all the machinery and make sure the rats don't eat up the wires. I love them all.
I love it. You got working cat dogs. But they bring those to you though. That's the bad side about that cat. They always like to show you their.
Yes, they do. A lot of time they'll bring a rat over to the back door, or many times they bring snake over to the back door and they leave it there.
Yeah, yeah. No, thank you. Hey, Director Jennings, are you you gotta have something. You just seem like the guy that's got some kind of pet in the house.
Definitely something, I will say that. If I could train cats to do what Director God trains them to do, I'd be a cat person. But I'm neither a cat nor a dog. I'm actually a parrot person. For most of my adult life, I had a parrot, African gray parrot, that I taught to talk and taught to love me and only me. And anybody else that would come up to her, she would either bite them on their lip or bark at them like a dog.
Good to know.
I'm a parrot.
Good to know. Director Soon, have you got a trick parrot up your sleeve?
No trick parrots, but my whole life I've been a dog person. But up until recently, my kids, they are cat people. So now we've got both. And I gotta admit, we've come to love cats as well. I never thought I would say that, but we like both.
It's an acquired taste then. You've learned to adapt. Let's see what I think. Rosie.
I am definitely a dog person. Oh, there I am. Dog person through and through. But cats are cute too.
I probably should ask you, what kind of dog?
I definitely, my family's dog is a mix of Rottweiler and Pit Bull, and so I'm definitely fond of bigger dogs.
I love it. Sweetheart. Let's see, who else is out there? Who I missed? Anybody else want to? Well, we can go. We can start here around the corner.
All right. Had a cat and dog sit.
Oh, nice.
Don't have a pet right now because I have children who I would like to not have to take care of, clean up them, and then I'll go back to a pet.
Yeah. One that doesn't talk back. Oh. So you guys got any pets in the house?
No, 2 boys is our current status, but they want a dog. So every day we get the request for a dog. So it'll happen soon.
I'm like, yeah.
Well, my daughter, who is 18, when she was 8, decided it was her life's mission to take care of adopt every animal from or foster, actually. We fostered every animal in the animal shelter. She had a knack for choosing, sadly, very sick kittens.
Mm-hmm.
And so we did not have a good track record, about 50% survival rate, which in baseball is a really good average, but not for kittens. So about a year into that experiment, she said, I cannot have another pet that's not going to make it. So we got a little puppy who's now 10. I don't know when I hope he lives a lot longer, but it is so he's so part of the family, as we all know, right, about pets. So when he eventually moves to the next world, I don't think we can handle anything else. I think that's it.
Chair, if I may, real quickly, my sister has multiple peacocks, multiple alpacas, chickens, at least 3 dogs, and at least 5 cats. And it's not surprising that she raised her daughter to become a very successful veterinarian in Sacramento.
Yeah. Well, and that's why she can afford all those animals. You got free veterinary care. That's it, right?
That's awesome.
any creatures large and small? Oh my God.
Yeah, I like them all.
You like them all?
Yep.
That's right. Yeah, you
Yep.
did. Well, I am gonna have to call Director Joyner because we're in the same boat. We lost our 12-year-old English Mastiff about a year ago. And it works with our personality because they don't do much and they're pretty darn easy to live with other than the size. And my husband said, never again, we're never getting another pet. And then now we're in that conversation of, oh, if you did, wouldn't that be nice? So I figure my toe is in the door, and because I'm ready again. I'll admit it. It's hard, but I'm looking at spring and I'm looking online. I can't help it. But then I go through the same thing. Do I get a rescue? Do I go back? We did the crazy Malinois, Belgian Malinois one year, and they're the smartest, most brilliant animal I've ever seen. They also are a lot of work, and so I think probably a Mastiff's more in my road. So I'm hoping next spring I'll have one of those cute little signs up there that says I miss my dog. Say anything else? I got some staff members. Anybody else that hasn't shared? I know I see Karen up there, Nicole. Well, I know more about all of us now. We will have to bring our pets to work day. So thank you guys so much for sharing. I enjoy learning a little bit more about everybody as we do this. So our first item of business is our consent calendar. And the item there is, we just have two items, the remote committee meeting and then our minutes. If everyone has had an opportunity to look at the consent items, could I get a motion?
Yes, I move approval.
Second.
Perfect. Moved and seconded. Any questions on those? And if not, a roll call vote, please.
Chair Gallardo, we do have a public comment, it looks like.
Oh, we do.
On this item.
Excuse me.
Would you like them to go ahead and speak now?
Please.
Okay. Alan Hirsch with YOLO Mobility. You are in the meeting and you have 3 minutes to speak.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Thank you very much. I'm sorry I came in a little late, but I assume that meeting really hasn't begun because you're talking about dogs and cats. I am concerned that basically that the board has not been informed about a major whistleblower that came from Caltrans in the last month, Jeannie Ward Weiler. She basically was told that the I-80 widening was being done prematurely before the environmental review was happening. They were misappropriating funds, the first error, to widen the freeway before the environmental impact statement was done. The second violation, you can't widen a freeway. They were using funds for repaving. You guys had in your tip to widen the freeway before the environmental impact statement was done. I'm also concerned that she talks about piecemealing, the chronic process of piecemealing. The I-80 corridor from Carquinez Straits to into Watt Avenue has been multiple projects, and each one is small, and basically many of them, not all, almost all of them, avoided environmental review. In other words, we piecemeal the projects of small little things and avoids the environmental review, just like the pre-paving project. That's the third violation. And we also know that basically, UC Davis studies that basically Caltrans modeling grossly understates induced demand, sometimes as much as 15 times. That understates the environmental impact. That justifies, that basically hides the environmental impact of these widenings, as well as basically saying that the widenings will fix congestion, which through induced demand, widenings do not fix congestion over the long term. Within 10 years, almost guaranteed a freeway will recongest. So the fourth violation. And I'm concerned that you guys need to have a robust discussion about what's going on with Caltrans, your partner here. And I'm also concerned that I've heard that basically the district director of Caltrans, District 3, has retired early, and there's been no discussion of that in public. And maybe this was in context with the whistleblower. I know this is really difficult stuff. I know this is embarrassing stuff, but we have a climate change crisis. I'm told there's a climate change crisis. Scientists are now using the word crisis, and we're not taking it seriously. I know it was important to spend 10 minutes to talk about dogs and cats this morning. Last time you talked about your favorite songs. It builds community. But basically, we need to address this difficult item. I'm sorry to be a Debbie Downer here. I'm sorry, but you need to talk about what's happening. And with Caltrans, an institution that is focused on widening freeways, which we know encourages driving and is killing our climate, killing our planet, and we are in a crisis state. Please attend to this issue. It's important for our children and our grandchildren. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Hirsch. Is there any other public comment on the consent calendar items?
There's no other comment.
All right, roll call vote, please.
Director Branscombe,
Yes.
Chapman,
Aye.
Gog,
Yes.
Early for Guerrero, absent. Jennings,
Yes.
Joyner,
Aye.
Lauren, absent. Sander, absent. Vice Chair Soon,
Aye.
and Chair Galdo.
Aye.
Motion carries.
Thank you. We're going to move on to our first action item, and that is the 2023 Metropolitan Transportation Plan, and Miguel Mendoza will be presenting.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Chair Galdo, Directors of Transportation Committee. Miguel Mendoza, analyst here. And please bear with me as I read this. It's a lot of words, right? The item before you is an action item. And what we are asking for is that the Transportation Committee recommend that the Board of Directors approve the resolution to do three things. The first one is adopt the 2023 Metropolitan Transportation Plan, including changes made in response to public comments. The second one is adopt amendment number 11 to the Metropolitan Transportation Improvement Program, including changes made in response to public comments. And the third one is adopt the accompanying air quality conformity determination. And my apologies, there's actually four. And the fourth is delegate authority to the executive director to make any necessary technical edits to the document to secure state and federal approval. So I know a handful there, so hopefully it's in your staff item if you want to read that again. And so just as a brief background on this item, the Metropolitan Transportation Plan adoption is a required 4-year update of our long-range federal plan. And as you may be aware, AB 350 gave us an extension on the state component of our MTP-SCS, Metropolitan Transportation Plan, Sustainable Community Strategy. And since we've gotten that approval and that's signed, which is awesome, we're now looking for the update on the federal side to keep us compliant and allow projects to keep moving forward in the meantime. This update, and I know there's a lot of documents as you look through it, I would urge you to look at the amendment number 11. There's a list of projects in there, and those really are the substantial changes that are being made and that we're asking to be approved. These changes were solicited from our local partners and were submitted. And so these are changes that they would like and have requested on their projects. And there's 22 of them. And I would say that they're relatively minor, changing either open and traffic dates or a clarification in scope, or adding and reducing funding in some cases, depending on either change in engineering estimates or what have you. And so we had a call for projects, and then next we had, after looking at all the project changes that were requested, we had a public comment period. And if you may recall, last month we had a public hearing on this specific item, and we did receive one verbal comment, but we also received written comments from our partner agencies, and those are addressed in the public comment and responses document. That should be part of your packet as well. And we've addressed those comments and made any technical changes that are needed to the document to satisfy the comments that were sent in. And so that's the sort of the document that we have before you today. But I kind of want to also cover the next steps if this is approved. In the larger plan update in 2025, we'll supplant what we are requesting to be approved now. And again, to just kind of repeat, the purpose of asking for approval now is to continue to be current with federal guidance, and that projects that need federal action can keep going for the next 2 years. When the next Metropolitan Transportation Improvement Program is adopted, hopefully next year, that will also supplant kind of the project changes that we have now. So this is, really a short range of time that we're going to be relying on this document as we make changes and improvements on our documents. I do want to note that there were no new projects introduced to the Metropolitan Transportation Plan as part of this update. We wanted to largely keep the plan the same and carry forward the same policies and programs that was adopted in 2019. That's also so that we can keep the federal side, which is the Metropolitan Transportation Plan, in concert with the Sustainable Community Strategies, which is the state side. And I want to clarify one final thing before I pause for comments, and that's I want to clarify technical changes or edits that we are asking for delegated authority for the executive director to be able to make. Technical changes being more of if a reference page is incorrect on one of our documents. A great example, I think, is a lot of the comments that we received in writing as part of the public comments, or clarifying dates, or misspellings of the like. Anything that would require more discussion in terms of policy or procedure would be brought back and asked for approval. The minor and editorial changes is what I would say. And so the next steps would be if approved, if this item is approved, and the board approves it as well, we would transmit it to Caltrans and FHWA for their approval. And that review could take 30 to a couple of months, which we have talked with our partners and completely understand. So I'll pause here for any sort of questions or clarifications I may be able to provide on this item.
Thank you. I see a couple hands up. Director Soon.
I believe Director Brascom was before me. I'm happy to defer.
Go ahead.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Director Brascom. And thank you, Miguel, for the briefing information. I have a question my staff raised to me, and that's in regards to how local agency formation commissions look at the MTP and future annexations. And so for any of us who may be annexing in the future, bringing in lands, if the local agency formation commission looks to the MTP, and by the way, we require any annexations to be consistent with the MTP for SACOG. If LAFCO starts to look at the MTP for future annexations and population growth, I'm wondering how we at SACOG treat the MTP or excuse me, annexations in the MTP. How do we address it? Maybe that's to Miguel from a technical perspective.
I can
or Clint, I'm sorry. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So and we're aware of the challenge in Elk Grove, and we do have this is an issue that we're talking about as we're updating the 2025 plan, the blueprint plan, because that is going to represent a complete refresh of our land use strategies for the long range plan. The MTP adoption that you're considering today, it maintains the land use assumptions of the previous plan. So there's no big substantial changes on land use strategy. But we have been sitting down with your staff in Elk Grove to think through what is going to be included or brought to you next year, most likely in this late spring, early summer of next year, to consider for a land use strategy. And that is where you would see kind of different plan areas, how much growth we're assuming in annexed areas, unincorporated areas within the city. It is a known issue though that we're working on with Christopher Jordan for the 2025 blueprint that'll represent that whole new land use strategy.
Yeah. Thanks, Clint. And because I mean, for any of our jurisdictions, right? If the MTP, talks about growth and population growth in the area, I mean, if there needs to be some qualification for the MTP so that LAFCOs around our areas can look at it appropriately, right? I wouldn't want LAFCO to say, hey, you know, the MPP says X, therefore we're not going to process your annexations when, you know, really the MPP looks at development that's happening now, right? Or in the near future. So somehow there needs to be some distinction there so that, you know, all our communities aren't inaccurately judged by LAFCO based on annexations versus, you know, the MPP. That's what I would request.
Yeah, hear you, and we'll make sure that we continue to work with your staff just to so that there aren't any surprises. And that issue is a bit unique in Sacramento County, the way that LAFCO approaches review of annexations. It is something that we're aware of and trying to work through and navigate those
okay.
challenges.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. Director Branscombe.
Thank you, ma'am. Referring to the Caltrans whistleblower, and at least in the initial report that appeared in the LA Times, there was a lot of discussion about, well, there was some discussion by her about piecemealing as a means of avoiding a thorough environmental review. There is on the document supporting her in the mem tip, Cal 18815, it's the second item on the first page of the summary of changes, which is to accelerate work north of Marysville on State Highway 70 from 24 to 23. That entire project was piecemealed into 7 or 8 pieces. I forget the exact number, but it's one of those two. And it's our view, it's my personal view, that was done in order to minimize environmental review and also to dampen public objections, although there was some litigation. The district director, who has announced retirement, actually came to a city council meeting in 2020. I was elected in November that year, and this was in advance of that, and made a presentation on this project. And he was asked pointedly, will this project increase traffic in Marysville? And he said no. He was asked again, and he said no. Now, I'm certain he was referring simply to the project that just is immediately, that is part of the city of Marysville and immediately north of the city, one of the 7 or 8 parts. And so there's no discussion of induced demand by taking 20 some odd miles of state highway and widening it from 2 to 5 lanes, 2 lanes in each direction and a center lane for access and exit. During the court, we are in litigation with Caltrans on matters associated with this. And in a non-confidential settlement discussion with the district director, I looked him in the eye and recalled that sequence at our city council meeting with him. And I said, so you were just speaking about the one section, right? He says, yeah. And I said, well, if you're being actually less than candid, weren't you? Because he had to know that you induce demand when you go from 2 lanes to 5. And also they point to the primary reason, he pointed to the primary reason for the improvement, well, the project, strike improvement, the project as safety, which was another point made by the Caltrans whistleblower, that safety is often an umbrella that is used to shade items that might otherwise experience closer environmental review. I mean, there's a potential with the amount of induced traffic on top of what is already besieging Marysville, that there may have been a discussion of a bypass alternative if there'd been a proper environmental review. Apologize, I know I mentioned some of this in our last SACOG open board meeting, It's just that when this comes up, I can't help myself. And I'll have a difficult time voting in favor of anything that advances anything to do with this project. And that is with all respect to staff at SACOG. You guys are doing great work. It's for the reasons discussed. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm not sure that you had any questions. Do you need any other things answered from staff on that for you, Director?
No, it was my opportunity to make a little speech, and I appreciate it. Thank you. It's a point to
Just
be
want to
made.
make sure I wasn't avoiding a question in there. So,
Oh, no, you're very kind. Thank you.
Director Joyner.
Thanks, Jill. I just wanted to very quickly thank staff for pointing out the definition of technical adjustments on this. I think, as you all know by now, I'm going to be very reluctant to support any delegation of authority, but given the very minor nature of what's been laid out, I'm going to go ahead and support this moving forward. I appreciate being aware of my cautiousness about that, so thank you.
Thank you. I did write down some notes because I knew that would come up for you, and I appreciated the minor editorial changes information. So thank you. That helped clarify for all of us. Any other questions for staff on this item? All right, seeing none, then I will open it up for public comment. Do we have any public comment on this item?
We do have public comment. Alan Hirsch with YOLO Mobility. Shall I allow him to speak now, please? Alan, you're in the meeting and you have 3 minutes to speak.
Thank you very much. First, I want to recognize the quality work by the SACOG staff. I appreciate the staff recording my entire public comment about this VMT at the last meeting in verbatim. It's accurately done. Thoroughness, I rarely see this sort of thoroughness, so I want to appreciate that. I want to point out that may I have it? This is a very long document, 708 pages. About a very quick review, you Google the word widening, it appears 1,062 times. The word bicycle appears 332 times in terms of the focus of the project, the entire thing. I know you're going to have to approve it. It's too late to change anything. But the focus on widening roads, and we know widening can be even shoulders. We know with from Caltrans that adding shoulders can be a preamble to making extra lanes, because Caltrans has done this according to the whistleblower. I also want to note that basically we do have a VMT reduction per capita in the plan of 5.3%. That's admirable, but the climate don't care how many people. The climate cares about how much absolute VMT increases, because that's the greenhouse gases, and that is increasing by 19.5%. We should be moving the total VMT down 20%, according to the state strap. So this plan is in violation of the state's climate plan. That should be a concern for all of you. And we need to basically reverse the story. I don't know exactly it's in the details and the small projects. God is in the details. So I know you have to approve this thing. And I also wonder about the VMT elasticities. You only have 8 to 12% VMT elasticities with widenings. UC Davis says it's about 100% after 10 years. I know local streets and roads are differently, but I think this board should have some scrutiny in terms about the elasticity, because we know that Caltrans particularly, and I don't know if local roads, the SAC-SIM model fully reflects VMTs, because there's an incentive to understate the elasticities on induced demand and thus justify the widenings as congestion relief. This is really, really important. We are in a crisis here. So thank you for taking attention to that revision of the SAC-SIM model. And I suggest also, we should review how accurate the SAC-SIM model has been over the last 20 years. We should look at the model 20 years ago.
30 seconds.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Hirsch. Is there any other public comment on this item?
There's no other public comment.
All right. Now close public comment. We'll bring it back to the board. Are there any other comments from our directors? All right, seeing none, then I will look for a motion.
I'll move staff's recommendation.
Jennings will second.
Thank you. Moved and seconded. Could we have a roll call vote, please?
Director Branscombe,
With full and due respect to staff and SACOG in general, for the reasons mentioned, I vote no.
Chapman,
Aye.
Gog,
Yes.
Early for Guerrero absent, Jennings,
Yes.
Joyner,
Aye.
Lauren absent, Sander absent, Vice Chair Soon,
Aye.
and Chair Galdo.
Aye.
Motion carries.
Thank you. Your voice now. All right, we're going to move on to our next item, which is our Engage, Empower, Implement Framework adoption, and Rosie will be our presenter.
Rosie, we can't hear you if you're on mute.
There we go. Of course, 2 years into Zoom and still can't figure it out. Sorry about that. Okay, good morning, everyone. Rosie Ramos here with the Engage, Empower, Implement Funding Program, or EEI as we'll use for short. We're here today to ask for your recommendation to the board to approve the EEI framework that is in your packet as an attachment, and we will be discussing today. So to give a little background of how we've gotten here, what we really want to discuss today is the framework that's in your attachment, and we are going to go into some of a little bit of the history of the EEI process. As a reminder, in 2020, the board made a unanimous decision to invest in the region's most disinvested communities and allocated $3 million. Since then, the pot was increased to $3.8 million a couple of months ago and opened it up to the 6 counties in our region. EEI is also an integral part of the Racial Equity Action Plan that the board adopted in 2022, and of course is also part of our blueprint goals of equity, environment, and economy. This year, we began work with our consultant, HRNA, who, by the way, was keynote speaker at the Livability Summit because of their strong work in displacement and economic development, and partnered with AIM Consulting, who many of the jurisdictions here have worked with. We've had a great collaboration with them and did several months of work around engagement and really working with community organizations where we've learned a lot and really have incorporated all of those learnings into the framework that you have before you. So what we're doing right now is really looking to the next slide, please, for the envisioned outcomes. And so what we really want to do with EEI is EEI is an investment to support community-based planning and the pre-construction work that happens before a project. So looking to really work with communities to envision and design projects across the region. We've had a lot of conversations this year about meaningful engagement and have seen great examples from our region, including Roseville's partnership with Health Education Council that we learned about early this year. This last month, we were in South Sacramento learning about La Familia and their partnership with the Franklin Boulevard Partnership and their joint efforts with the city that has lended them access to grant dollars and are now developing a community center. So really showing the trajectory of doing engagement early on and creating programs and projects that meet the community's needs. These examples include many others that we see across the state and country as well, and that we want to model the work that we do through EEI, and really boiling down to the concepts that are illustrated on the screen. Really looking to create partnerships with community organizations and the jurisdictions, wanting to rebuild that trust through an authentic and meaningful engagement, creating the tools and best practices that we know have worked, actionable and concrete implementation steps, racial equity within the region's investments, community supported projects, of course, and then federal and state alignment for more access to funding. Another point that I want to discuss that was brought up at our last discussion with the board last month was the nexus to transportation that EEI has. So at our board meeting last month, we had that brief conversation, but really want to dive deeper. And what you see here is a graphic that might look familiar. It's the play rugs that many kids have played on, many of us have played on, and it depicts a neighborhood. And I think what really we're trying to get at with this is the concept that Planning can be difficult. It's a very technical skill, but if we break it down, even as kids, we know what a complete neighborhood looks like. The images here show housing and hospitals and construction and access to the lakes and connected roadways. And so we really want to show what a complete neighborhood is, because that is really what EEI is looking to invest in. Complete communities that enable residents to travel in ways that reduce their greenhouse gas emissions, that provide access to those resources without having to drive in a vehicle alone, being able to walk or roll or scoot to the bike and bike to everyday necessities. So planning has been divided into various buckets that include housing and land use and transportation and so on. But in the end, we really are trying to make a real and lasting, meaningful impact. We do have to look at it holistically. And so really wanting to understand how all these various aspects of planning come together to impact people's everyday lives. So it's really looking at creating the complete community so that folks don't have to be so heavily dependent on vehicles, so that they don't have to make, long journeys to accessing the resources. EEI has that holistic perspective in planning so that we can tackle our transportation needs through the built environment. And so with that, I do want to hand it over to my colleague Nicole to go over some of the engagement and lessons that we've learned before we dive into the framework.
Thank you, Rosie. So speaking of holistic, the framework that we are sharing with you today was not created in a bubble. We knew from the beginning that we would need to talk with both community-based organizations and jurisdictions throughout our region. We held 7 CBO focus group meetings, 2 roundtable discussions, and a jurisdictional survey to really try to understand the challenges, opportunities, and needs of our region. And some of the key findings from our discussions are shown here. And we've shared these before. I do think that it's important just to really ground our efforts in this feedback. Engage, Empower, Implement has, from the start, been designed to serve our region's needs as defined by our communities. And what we found throughout this short engagement effort this year is that many of our CBO's needs actually do align with our jurisdiction's needs. And you'll find in the framework that we're sharing with you today that there are specific recommendations that address the need for longer pre-application periods, simpler application requirements, and clear specific evaluation metrics, just to name a few. So what do we have that's included in the framework? EEI will explore opportunities to advance equity in both the design of the grant funding process itself, but also within each recommendation. Our framework identifies 3 core dimensions of equity to help us achieve our program goals. And just to review those again, that includes structural equity, which addresses underlying structural factors and policies that continue to uphold inequities. It commits to correcting past harms and preventing future unintended consequences. And procedural equity designs decision-making processes that are transparent and inclusive. It acknowledges the imbalances in power and technical expertise that often exist when we have marginalized communities working with our public agencies in decision-making processes. And this is something that we have consistently heard from both CBOs and jurisdictions throughout our engagement process. And third, distributional equity, which ensures the fair and diverse distribution of services and resources, and will place a priority on supporting our communities that have the greatest needs. Now, our consultant team provided their recommendation for our EEI funding program framework, which is highlighted here. And we've used the consultant's framework along with the feedback from our board, our CBOs, our city and county staff to develop the framework that you have as an attachment today. And with that, Rosie is going to walk you through the final framework, which we are asking you to take action on today.
Thank you, Nicole, for walking through that important background. So as you'll see in your packet, we have simplified the framework. The last month, we went to the board and shared with you the document that our consultant had made. We were very happy with it. It was a fantastic lessons learned and compilation of all of the comments and great specific recommendations. And so we have taken all of that information and simplified it into this 5-page framework that really has all the core elements that we will then use to create the very specific guidelines and the pre-application and application process. Of course, one of the big highlights is the eligible applicants for this program. Through the conversations that we had with the CBOs and jurisdictions, we really are emphasizing a partnership. Applicants will be partnerships between cities and counties that will enable that trust, creating more trust within the two organizations. But at the same time, we have heard from different CBOs and as well as a consultant recommendation that there are some cases where individual CBOs should be awarded independently. This would be for individual organizations that have higher capacity for administrating a grant and higher staff capacity as well. So we do want to leave a small bucket available for any possible opportunities that might come up through the pre-application period. And so that's one of the two different buckets that we will have is majority for partnerships, but also being open to just CBO applications. And those grant awards for the partnerships would look, the numbers that we're talking about would be between 150 to 300,000 for partnerships, but with a maximum of 500,000 should a project need that much. And then for an independent CBO, a maximum of 80,000. And now when I say independent, I know we had a lot of conversations with our jurisdictions as well and our consultant of talking about, well, how could a CBO do something independently? And while they would be the lead applicant alone, it doesn't mean that a city would not be included as a partner and as a stakeholder in the process. We would still want to have robust conversations with the jurisdiction that they're working within and making sure that they are part of the ongoing process. For the pre-application, this was one of the biggest things that I think came out of our process with conversations with our CBOs and jurisdictions is really wanting to have time before an application is released to understand what are the possibilities and project concepts that they could do, and really looking to do some capacity building. And capacity building can have a lot of various definitions of really looking to have workshops and trainings with both jurisdictions and the community organizations and really working to understand each other's needs. There's definitely need for sharing out some of our procurement processes to the CBOs. And so making sure that we have the adequate time to make sure that everyone has the right documentation and all of those efforts really also align with our goals in our racial equity action plan for our procurement strategies to really be more open and available to different possible partners. And of course, there will be some technical support that we provide, and overall just giving us time to have that relationship building and partnership building time that we'll need to really come up with good concepts for EEI. And then of course, the application and metrics itself, we will be developing as simple and clear applications as we can, making sure that we are clear about the metrics that we will be looking at as we move forward. There definitely are a lot of things to consider when creating metrics, and we had these conversations with our partners and how difficult these types of metrics can be, but really wanting to look at, emphasizing the benefits and opportunities to the communities, creating those very clear partnership roles between the CBO and the jurisdiction. How do we measure community involvement and looking to create mechanisms that really uphold those values, and understanding and acknowledging historical disinvestment. So these are a lot of the different options, and they're included in the metrics document that you have with you that we will be considering to use within the guidelines. And so, of course, all of that boils down to what are some of the eligible concepts that we will be hoping to see through the EI process. Of course, I already mentioned the Franklin District Community Playbook. And of course, we saw Roseville and Health Education Council and their work in the Latino community in the downtown area. We've also heard from our partners at Metropolitan Transportation Commission, where they've done community-based transportation plans. And then, of course, there's our partners at SJCOG that have done a Stockton Mobility Collective that led them to a great investment for additional funding to do this type of work. And different options like Cambodia Town that include a community vision plan. All of these have different types of projects that could include, participatory budgeting efforts, a connection to transportation where pedestrian improvements are made, potentially bike share or car share needs, really looking to uplift the voices that are coming up in that engagement process and really addressing their needs. That could be an education center or cafe, street trees, vertical gardens. These are all examples that are within these different buckets here. And as mentioned, we really are looking to have a broad understanding so that we can invest in creating complete communities that ultimately do connect to the transportation goals of reducing greenhouse gas emissions and promoting more active modes of transportation. So we have the timeline here for you. We're here on the pink, hoping that you recommend this framework to the board, with the pre-application period essentially starting this winter, January through April, and spring calling for applications in April through June, giving folks enough time to do the application, and then looking to come back to you all with recommendations in September of next year. So with that, I'll pause and take any questions or comments that you might have.
You, Rosie. Get our screen back up here and see if we have any hands up, any questions?
Yes.
Oh, there you are. Go ahead, Director
Yes,
Renfro.
it's not a question so much as a comment. This is very interesting. My colleague here, Vincenzo, who runs Public Works here in Marysville.
That would be him.
He can't help himself. Anyway, we were discussing this in real time. This is very interesting to Marysville, particularly with Chinatown. And we will be engaging with the Chinese community here in Marysville and seeing how this might be approached by them. It's a very interesting presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Director Jennings.
Thank you. I can't be more impressed with all the work that's been done on this, and I just want to compliment the staff. These kind of programs get me excited, and just the name in itself, engage, empower, and implement. Those are three powerful words that we're all trying to do every single day in supporting our communities and making our communities better. We've got to engage with them. We have to empower them, and we have to implement successful strategies together, all for the purposes of equity. So I actually changed your name, which was Engage, Empower, Implement. I changed it to Engage, Empower, Implement for Equity, right? So it's specific in the name exactly what we're going to get out of this. But I like this in every way possible, supporting community-based planning, engagement early on as far as the nexus of transportation and complete neighborhoods and housing, land use, and transportation, supporting the entire community and the whole pre-application process, application workshops and trainings and technical support. Everything that you have here has been well thought out. And the number of nonprofits that you've talked to and engaged in is impressive. So I'm a big fan of what we're doing here. So if there's a recommendation to move this forward to the full board, I'd like to make that recommendation.
Well, thank you so much. Any other questions before we open it up for public comment? Okay, so I'll just have a comment after. So we'll now open it up for public comment. Do we have any public comment on this item?
We do. We have a public comment. Would you like me to go ahead and allow them to speak now?
Yes, please.
All right, Alan Hirsch with YOLO Mobility. You are in the meeting. You have 3 minutes to speak.
Thank you very much. First, 2 quick comments. I know we don't like to think about it, but about 20% of the students at UC Davis are food insecure. We have poverty there. And I would suggest that the Associated Students of University of Davis should be involved with this thing. They are certainly a community group, and their needs should be considered also. Students are heavily transit dependent. They have little income or no income, even grad students. Thank you very much. Also, I would suggest trees are very important and tree groups should be touched. I was at a hearing for the unmet needs, and I was told that basically having shade around bus stops was not an unmet need. So people can wait outside in 100-degree temperature without shade, and that's all just fine. But we could ignore that and siphon money away from transit to build roads for drivers who sit in air-conditioned cars. I suggest that basically one of the things that sport should do is basically to change the definition of unmet needs to include bus stops and frequency. Thank you. Also, I'm quite concerned that basically by doing this program, this can tend to veer into performative versus actual changes that meet the needs of the social inequity in our We consider transit riders a second tier system, a third class system that we can focus on roads and do little token, little bicycle, little pedestrian, little stuff. And we're not really addressing the full holistic thing by siphoning off the poor among us. We basically give them token stuff, and basically we spend. These are going to be $100,000 grants, and we're spending billions of dollars widening our freeways and widening our roads, which we know disproportionately advantages the rich. And when we set up toll roads and convert our HOV lanes to toll rates, we advantage the rich again. And our HOV lanes inherently are inequitable because we basically give passes to people who can afford an electric car or have a place to plug it in, but not to the people who have to drive in their gas vehicles. We should recognize the structural mechanisms we already have built into our system and fix that, and not just basically say we've done this, couple $100,000 grant, check the box. We have a lot of work to be done. I know this is a challenge. We need some transformational change. Thanks for listening. Please approve this plan. It's a great first step, but it is far from adequate. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other public comment?
There's no other public comment.
All right. Then I will close public comment and we'll bring it back to any other comments before we move for a motion. I will tell you myself that I'm following up on what Director Jennings mentioned. I'm really excited. It is a first step, but it's a first step that I think staff's done a really good job helping us reach out to all the various groups. I know Director our public commenter mentioned Ducey Davis. I'm excited. This is a 6-county project. Obviously we have the same thing with Sierra College and William Jessup in my city, Sac State. We have a lot of groups out there, and it is very challenging to get to everyone, but I really feel like we're doing a great job with this first step forward, and it's exciting to get to do something to see some measurable results. So we're looking forward to it. And with that, I believe Director Jennings, you had a motion on the.
Absolutely. I'd like to move this forward to the full council.
Second.
Thank you. Moved and seconded. A roll call vote, please.
Thank you, Director Branscombe.
Yes.
Chapman.
Aye.
Gog.
Yes.
Early for Guerrero. Absent. Jennings.
Yes.
Joyner.
Aye.
Lauren absent. Sander absent. Vice Chair Soon. Absent. Chair Gallardo.
Yes.
Thank you. Motion carries.
Thank you all. We're going to move on to our information items. The first item is Senate Bill 125, the transit funding update. And Kristen, I believe you're going to do our thing.
Yes, I am going to do this for everyone. Good morning. Nice to see everyone this morning. So if you remember, just last month, Chris Doherty brought an item forward to give everybody sort of the first look and an insight into what we call SB 125, which is some new funding from the state government for transit. The money is coming from the TIRCIP, or the Transit and Intercity Rail Capital Program fund that is managed by the California State Transportation Authority. Across the state, there's a large amount of money that's available specifically to our region. There's about 200, and when I say region, I'll clarify 4 counties because the other 2, our TPAs in our region, will be getting their funds directly since this is state money. So the 4-county region will be getting a little over $200 million from the first program, which is what we call the TIRCIP funding, and another 37 and change million in what is the zero emission program that they have as well. So we're pretty excited about this in the region, but we're taking the first steps here today with just a little bit of insight into what our potential strategy will be for how we are planning to allocate this funding. So a quick reminder, by December 31st, we are required by the state to submit an initial allocation plan. That initial allocation plan does not need to have everything in it. We do not need to show how we're going to use that full $200+ million. It is just the first cut to kind of get things going. So over the past few weeks, the SACOG staff has been having in-depth meetings with our transit operators who are eligible for the funding to try to find out what the current needs are for both capital and operating. And we have put in the staff report today an initial plan for what our strategy will be for this December 31st allocation request.
Dr. Gog, if you could mute.
Okay, no problem.
Okay. All right, let me step back for a second here. Okay, so we've put together a strategy for what our initial allocation plan will be for December 31st. And we will plan to be updating that early in 2024 as we start to be able to dig into it more. One of the requirements to use this funding, particularly if you're going to be using it for operating, is to do sort of a deep dive financial analysis that really sort of illustrates what the operating needs are for all of the transit operators. So our first plan is to only allocate money by December 31st for capital needs. And that's simply just so that we can take the time that we need to be able to conduct a thorough analysis of the operating requests that might be put forward, but we fully intend to address some of the operating concerns that I know some of our transit providers do have. It's really important to make sure that we are not increasing their funding deficits so that they're able to continue on with their services. One important thing to note with the operating is that the program really does focus on maintaining service levels rather than expanding service levels. So making sure that we're not requiring any additional service cuts or that we're bringing back service that had been cut before. The key to this funding really is to maintain ridership. Ridership needs to be maintained based on a base level from 2021, I believe. So it's not pre-pandemic, it's sort of in post-pandemic ridership levels. So not trying to go back to what was, 2019 and before. So our initial allocation strategy, as I mentioned, is to focus on capital for the December 31st submission. And you all will be seeing this again in December, where we'll actually have the projects from our service providers that we want to include. But there's sort of three key elements to the strategy that we're putting forward. The first is to focus on capital projects that are currently underway that might be at risk of losing existing funding. We don't want to see something that's, on its way to being done and see it go away. There's a lot of unforeseen financial issues that may come up on projects. Over the past few years, we want to make sure that we're not jeopardizing those projects. This money is also eligible to be used as a match for this TIRCIP Cycle 7, which will be next year. So providing potential matches for large infrastructure projects that do help increase ridership and maintain service. That can be for rail, that can be for bus, that can be for facilities. So looking at how we can provide some match to that, there is some discussion that could make projects more competitive for Cycle 7. It's not a guarantee, but that is something that's eligible. And then also some near-term planning efforts that might address some of the pandemic losses. So things that we can do, such as long-range transit plans, comprehensive operations analyses, things that really can take a look at how maybe services could be offered and designed in a way that makes them more efficient and effective with the money that's available. So that is the current plan. As I mentioned, we will bring something in December with more detail about the actual projects, and that will be an action item for you all then. So that is the report for today. Happy to answer any questions someone may have. Thank you.
All right, thank you. I'm looking to bringing it back for questions from the committee. Clearly you were thorough. I don't see any hands up.
That's my goal.
I love it. Well, thank you. And I said that's just an information item, so we will then move on to our next item.
Chair Galdo, I do have a public comment, if I can read that into the record.
Perfect. Oh, want to read it? You got it. Thank you.
Thank you. This is from Rosalind Mack Bell, a citizen, regarding funding for trails in North Natomas Regional Park. She says, I have lived in Natomas for nearly 20 years. I'm writing about the lack of funding for North Natomas Regional Park. I've submitted a proposal to the City of Sacramento for dirt gravel trails to be placed in the park. Running and walking are the most popular activities at the park. People have informally created paths. Getting people out of their cars and using alternative transportation would be awesome. I would appreciate your help in securing funding. And that concludes the written public comment. And there's no other public comment.
Thank you. Okay, that was our last informational item. So actually, we do? Am I missing? Oh, excuse me. Yeah, we have a long one, the big one. Our next item is our 2025 blueprint, discussion of land use and transportation strategies for greenhouse gas reduction and advancing the triple bottom line. And Zachary Miller is our presenter.
Thank you, Chair Gallardo. Let me go ahead and share my screen with the presentation. Bear with me for 1 second. All right. Should be up. Can I get a thumbs up that it's up on the screen?
Yes, you're good.
Okay. All right. Well, good morning, everyone. My name is Zach Miller, and I am the program manager for the MTP, the Metropolitan Transportation Plan and Sustainable Community Strategy, which we're referring to for this iteration of the plan as the 2025 blueprint. I'll just jump right into the presentation here. So as we learned at our last meeting, achieving the region's greenhouse gas target is going to be a challenge for the 2025 blueprint for a number of reasons. That's not to say that achieving the target is not, that it's not achievable, but we're going to need to critically look at all the strategies available to us in order to continue to work towards achieving our GHG target. So the primary intent of this presentation is going to be to examine some of the available greenhouse gas reduction strategies and really highlight the associated co-benefits of those strategies across the triple bottom line of environment, economy, and equity. So I'm going to be going through a small sample of the available strategies at our fingertips. And these strategies were primarily selected based on some of the comments and questions we have heard from this committee, as well as other committees and the board over the past year. So just to provide a bit of background context, make sure we're all starting from the same place. I realize that this may be repeat information for many of you, but what is the 2025 blueprint? So one of SACOG's major jobs as designated by the federal government and as required by Senate Bill 375 is to maintain a regional transportation plan. So this plan lays out a set of strategies for an integrated multimodal transportation system, as well as a regional development pattern that can really create a more thriving region that works for all of our residents. Within this document, and this document outlines recommendations for public land use policy, as well as transportation investment strategies for the SACOG region over the next 20 to 30 years. And as I alluded to, this plan includes what's called a sustainable community strategy, or an SCS, as I'll refer to it moving forward. And this document, the SCS, really needs to demonstrate how the region could achieve the state mandated greenhouse gas emissions reductions from passenger vehicles through integrated land use and transportation planning. So the 2025 blueprint is also going to be shaped by the triple bottom line, as you all well know. So the triple bottom line framework uses the three overarching goals of economy, environment, and equity. And these three goals will really be used to shape the discussions and strategies for the blueprint, the 2025 blueprint. So in summary, this plan is really going to aim to come together around a collective vision to advance economic prosperity in the region, support environmental health and resiliency, and promote equity through reducing transportation and housing disparities in the region. So providing a bit of a summary of what was presented to you in October by my colleague Kyle Shipley as it relates to the SACOG's greenhouse gas reduction target, just as a refresher. So in 2018, CARB adopted more aggressive greenhouse gas reduction targets as one measure to support progress towards state goals. And the revised GHG reduction target for the SACOG region was set by the California Air Resources Board at 19% per capita by 2035. And that's based on, in comparison to 2005 baseline levels. So just as a reminder, all three previous MTP SCSs done for this region showed that we could and would achieve the greenhouse gas reduction target if the plan was implemented. So moving on, if an MPO is not able to meet the regional target, then they must prepare what's called an alternative planning strategy, or an APS, that would show how the region could potentially meet the target. So beyond the cost of preparation and maintenance of this APS document, the main risks to SACOG and its member agencies associated with preparation of an APS would be the potential loss of some CEQA streamlining benefits for projects, and also the potential loss of certain competitive grant programs. So there's several state funding programs that require the region, the SACOG region has an adopted SCS, not an APS, in order to compete for this grant funding. We did some calculations in-house at SACOG, and we estimated that in totality since 2018, the SACOG region has received over $1 billion in transportation funding from these state competitive grant programs. And this is roughly double the amount that SACOG has available to the program, to program and allocate from other regional funding programs. So as I get into the strategy that I'll be presenting here in a bit, I want to acknowledge that we have choices throughout the region, and a one-size-fits-all approach is not necessarily going to be the answer. So this takes on meaning in several different aspects. So one being, generally, we've been growing in a one-size-fits-all approach to housing, primarily focusing on large lot suburban development. And we've heard through our public engagement and outreach that more of a balanced approach and additional options for individuals in terms of housing is needed in the region. And then also the one-size-fits-all approach is not going to work as it relates to greenhouse gas reduction strategies. We recognize that all strategies are not directly applicable to all jurisdictions throughout the region and all geographies throughout the region for a number of reasons. So as we go through these strategies, I would like you all to keep the question listed here in mind so that at the end of the presentation, we can have a robust discussion on, what might help make the blueprint more meaningful to your local jurisdictions. Right. So I want to start with these two specific strategies that you see here up here on your screen, electric vehicles and telework. Both of these came up at the October committee meetings and have come up throughout the year at other board and committee meetings. And I'm hoping with this presentation here to provide some clarity and reasoning behind why these strategies, although effective, cannot solely be relied upon to meet our greenhouse gas reduction target for the region. So in terms of electric vehicles, and bear with me a bit here because I'm going to be going through kind of a few different steps. So Senate Bill 375, within that bill, it indicates that metropolitan planning organizations such as SACOG may not take credit for state programs and policies that improve vehicle emission standards, changes in fuel consumption, and other state measures that will reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And MPOs such as SACOG may not take credit for those when they're quantifying their emissions, their greenhouse gas emissions relative to reduction targets set by the state. It's also important to note here that the California Air Resources Board identifies market forces along with state and federal policy and programs as the primary means for driving this transition within the state to zero emission vehicles or electric vehicles. So the transition to electric vehicles is essentially something assumed and accounted for by the California Air Resources Board in their calculation of greenhouse gas emissions for the state in the future. And because fleet electrification is an assumption that's baked into those California Air Resources Board quantifications of future GHG emissions, and is considered a state-led program or measure, MPOs are not able to take credit for fleet electrification in our MTPSCS. And this really just ensures that a double counting of GHG reductions is not taking place. So that's the basics on the electric vehicles. However, I'll provide some additional details on the provision of electric vehicle charging infrastructure a little bit later in the presentation as a potential measure.
Hey, Zach, quick question.
Yes.
What if the assumptions about electric vehicle transitions are busted on the state level?
Can you repeat that question?
Sure. Well, electric vehicle sales are not going currently as assumed. 3 of the major manufacturers are having big second thoughts about their investments in electric vehicles. So if the state has baked in assumptions about the transition to electric vehicles, and that does not happen, which busts the entire plan, you know, on a state level, what happens and how does that affect us?
It could potentially in the future, but those are assumptions that I'm sure would be reconsidered by the state as more data is acquired. But for this iteration of the blueprint that'll be, you know, adopted hopefully by the end of 2025, I don't anticipate that any of those assumptions or those trends would be accounted for, and our targets not going to be changing in that time frame. And so essentially now we're operating within the framework that we have set for us by the state. But I would assume that's a great question, and I would assume that moving forward, if it does not accelerate the way the state has seen it, they would need to readjust, recalculate, and basically readjust targets as well to account for that, and potentially rely more on MPOs to help speed up that process.
Which would be in conflict with the market driving the transition.
Potentially.
All right, thank you.
I see Director Branscombe has his hand up.
Thank you. Two parts. First, just to confirm, I presume that SACOG and you and we are guided by the Air Resources Board vision of electric vehicles.
Yes.
As being effective. I've read in the last week, and these are 2 recent articles that are in-depth analyses of the prospects for electric vehicles. And they create significant doubt about those prospects relating to upstream costs that aren't calculated when the analysis is simply post-purchase, and some other concerns that are significant. Do we know if the Air Resources Board is taking a second look at their support or the degree to which they support electric vehicles in light of some of this recent analysis that seemed cogent to me?
I do not have any knowledge of that being reassessed at this moment. I would defer if any others on this call have heard of that being the case. I would urge you to voice that now, but I have not heard any such reconsideration of those assumptions.
I have some time with Mr. Corliss tomorrow, and I'm going to share a couple of those articles with him, and he can filter them back to staff as he deems appropriate.
Okay, that sounds great. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, moving on to telework. So telework, it's undeniable at this point that telework is really changing the landscape of transportation in terms of travel patterns, but the vehicle miles traveled and associated greenhouse gas emissions associated with telework is really a much more complex story. So obviously there are different forms of telework, each of which have different travel patterns and vehicle miles traveled generation. So obviously there's people who are working full-time in a telework capacity. There are individuals who are working part-time, going into the office a couple days a week, some that are going in for half days and coming home. So obviously the trip generation, as well as the the kind of overall travel patterns really vary for all the different telework options. But from an overarching perspective, there are studies and data that has shown that while the trip length of teleworkers has decreased as a result of not having to, say, travel into the office or travel to a work site, the actual vehicle miles traveled of these workers has, in some cases, increased due to an increase in the number of trips that they've taken throughout the day. So think of teleworkers working from home, not going into the office, have the flexibility and ability to take care of errands throughout the day and make other discretionary trips throughout the day that they may not be able to make when they're actually in an office and don't have that same flexibility. Additionally, some studies and data show that VMT is different based on geographic locations and responds differently based on geographic locations. So for example, some suburban jurisdictions become more VMT efficient and with increases in telework, while other similar areas for a number of different factors may not see those same vehicle miles travel reductions. So it's very context sensitive, the telework question. So this is all to say that it's a pretty complex issue, and we are actively studying a variety of data sources and information, and we're going to be incorporating the increase in telework that is out there that we see that is supported by data into our modeling and greenhouse gas reduction quantification. However, although telework, it appears to be a strategy to be further studied and pursued in the correct context, it by no means is a silver bullet that can be expected to singularly achieve our greenhouse gas target. So in summary, both these strategies, electric vehicles and telework, they're both very important and effective strategies, obviously, to achieve our greenhouse gas target, but it'll only get us so far towards that target due to some of the factors I just discussed. Okay, so now the strategies that I'm about to present are examples of how we can consider greenhouse gas reduction strategies through a broader lens that goes beyond just their greenhouse gas reduction potential. So while these strategies may help the region achieve the greenhouse gas target, we also need to be considering the co-benefits that these strategies will achieve. So in fact, the best policies and strategies at our disposal will advance multiple objectives that tie back to the triple bottom line and help shape and maintain this region as a region that people want to live. So one of the primary land use strategies as it relates to greenhouse gas emissions reductions is increasing residential and or jobs density. So as I mentioned earlier, the Sustainable Community Strategy, or SCS, needs to demonstrate how the region could achieve the state mandated reductions through integrated land use and transportation planning. And this strategy is very much hits that intersection of land use and transportation planning. So increased densities, residential or jobs, can affect the distance people travel and also provide greater options for the mode of travel. So increasing residential and or jobs density results in shorter and fewer trips by single occupancy vehicles, and thus you get a reduction in greenhouse gas emissions. So when pairing measures such as increasing housing density and pairing that with increasing jobs density, there's a cumulative densification from these measures that can result in a highly walkable and bikeable area that yields increased co-benefits and VMT reductions, improved public health and social equity. So I think this is a time I'd like to acknowledge that, again, that not every strategy is going to work in every part of the region, or strategies may look different depending on the location where they're deployed. So for example, increasing density in a downtown may take the form of vertical density. Well, in more rural and or suburban locations, it may be more horizontal in nature. So it's important to note here that concentrating density where it makes sense, say, for example, in or around centers and corridors and established communities, can take development pressure off rural parts of the region, for example, that want to stay more rural and don't want to have residential developments kind of bleed into those areas. Then in the context of jobs density, sometimes it may make sense in some suburban residential areas to protect commercial or other employment uses from converting to residential, or generally increase employment uses in these areas, which will help put jobs, shopping, and services closer to where people are already living. So that's just all to say that when we're thinking about the strategies that are available to us, it's more about working together in the regional context, recognizing that every jurisdiction, area, locality has different needs, and doing so all to preserve what makes this region special and really generating a diversity of places and options for the residents of this region. So then to touch on some of the co-benefits here, the reduction in vehicle trips associated with these densification strategies is not only going to reduce VMT and greenhouse gas emissions, it's also going to result in a reduction of air pollutants. So it's not only going to help us hit our greenhouse gas reduction target, but it's also going to help address Federal Clean Air Act requirements, which also have to be addressed in the plan. The increased vehicle fuel savings related to a reduction in trips will be realized through shorter and fewer trips by residents and employees. So it takes a little bit of the strain off the pocketbooks of individuals living in these communities. Then one of the big things is public health. As you may remember, a presentation was given by UD4H a few months back. During this presentation, research was shared on public health as it relates to the pathways that were being examined at that time. So this analysis and study that was done by UD4H really showed that pathway 1, which was the most dispersed land use development pattern, had the highest rates of, BMI, obesity, diabetes, and other health indicators. Well, pathway 3, which included the most compact land use development pattern, which would be most consistent with the strategy we're talking about here, the infill and job and housing densification, had the lowest rates of those health indicators. So the difference in those outcomes is largely a product of the extent to which the built environments in each of those 2 pathways facilitated physical movement for residents of those areas. And then obviously the resulting economic outlook of these health metrics has implications for the regional average cost of illness, which was also presented during that presentation. And then finally, the equity benefits of this strategy really cuts across most of the co-benefits. So for example, disadvantaged communities typically have a greater preponderance of local air quality impacts, which I noted before, this strategy would help address. Similarly, disadvantaged communities also have a higher incidence of asthma and heart disease, which I also noted earlier. This strategy would help reduce, thus improving equity in our region. So as you can see, not only do these potential land use strategies help us achieve our greenhouse gas reduction target for the purposes of our Sustainable Community Strategy, or SCS, but it also ties directly into and helps achieve all aspects of our triple bottom line of environment, economy, and equity. So another measure that has been discussed previously is the provision of school bus service. So this is more of a transportation-centric measure as opposed to a land use strategy. And obviously a school bus service can reduce the number of private vehicle trips to drop off and pick up students, which can substantially reduce the number of trips in a day, thereby reducing VMT and associated greenhouse gas emissions. So looking at the co-benefits of this potential measure, it's also going to reduce localized air pollution emissions, especially if the bus is zero emissions. And so it would help address Federal Clean Air Act requirements mandated by the plan, as I discussed previously. The strategy can also result in bike and pedestrian safety co-benefits, specifically around the school, by reducing the number of vehicles accessing the school during pickup and drop-off times. which would help provide a safer biking and walking environment for those students who are using those modes of transportation to access school on a daily basis. And I know just from personal experience at my kids' school, pickup and drop off time is absolute chaos, and it can get incredibly unsafe for bicyclists and pedestrians, so much so that most parents don't want their kids walking or biking to school because of all those potential conflicts with automobiles in and around the schools. So lastly, I think from an equity perspective, this strategy can also obviously help provide transportation to and from school for students and families who may not have access to personal vehicles or only have one vehicle and need to use that vehicle to access jobs or be used for other needs. So this is a program we're going to be investigating further to understand how the region can play a role, given that there is a complicated set of state laws around how school bus programs are funded and operated. So we're actively looking into that. But we do know it can certainly make an impact. It seems like somewhat of a small strategy, an insignificant strategy, but it can have a noticeable impact. And so SACOG and our partners need to look at how we can really drive solutions. That's the key question here. Then moving on to a few additional strategies that I'll just talk about much more briefly. So EV charging infrastructure, I had mentioned this before when I was talking about electric vehicles. So this strategy could consist of installing on-site electric vehicle chargers in an amount beyond what's required for under the 2019 California Green Building Standards, or CalGreen. And this is primarily in the context of new development. So it's important to note here that this strategy, it would need to be the electric vehicle parking spaces would need to be in addition to what's required by CalGreen, that state kind of policy, in order to take any sort of GHG reduction associated with that. Further, the state, obviously, as I mentioned, noted that state, federal, and market forces are the primary driving forces behind electrification of the fleet. So the provision of EV charging infrastructure may be difficult to use as a quantifiable GHG reduction strategy in the future for future blueprints subsequent to this 2025 blueprint. And then a few of these additional strategies. So transportation demand management, micromobility, and transit. So these are all strategies that are fundamentally designed to increase the transportation system efficiency and reduce demand on the system. And these strategies would result in many of the same co-benefits as the previous two strategies I presented, as it pertains to air quality, public health, and equity. So obviously they'd reduce localized air quality impacts and improve public health outcomes due to the reduction in auto trips that they're looking to realize. And this could also address equity if implemented in disadvantaged communities. Additionally, taking cars off the road would have an economic benefit of reducing wear and tear on our roadways and the associated costs and maintenance of that repair. And then for transit specifically, equity benefits would be achieved through providing an alternative to driving, but it's also a lifeline for many households without readily available access to a personal vehicle. So this is all just to say that, as you can see, many of the GHG reduction strategies presented here today have co-benefits that cut across one, if not all, of the triple bottom line goals. And it's important to note that thinking through the local land use context and the applicability of each strategy in that local land use context is essential. So after going through all these strategies, I'd like to reiterate that we're going to need to consider many of these strategies as tools for achieving not only our greenhouse gas reduction target, but also the triple bottom line in the 2025 blueprint. And then as a bit of a look ahead, next year in 2024, we'll be bringing back a couple additional presentations on the greenhouse gas target. And so approximately spring. It's still to be decided, but maybe in spring 2024, we'll have a preliminary greenhouse gas results for discussion scenario presentation. And then we'll also be discussing other additional policy options and measures used by other MPOs, metropolitan planning organizations, throughout the state that SACOG could potentially consider in the 2025 blueprint. So with that, I would ask you all to consider the question that I posed earlier on in the presentation of what might help make the blueprint more meaningful to your local jurisdictions in the context of these potential greenhouse gas reduction strategies. So I thank you for your time. And if you have any questions, comments, or I'd be more than happy to answer those.
All right, thank you. We'll pull up the screen here and see if we have any questions. No, I'm not seeing any hands up. Okay. Then we will move on and see if there's any public comment on this item.
We do have a public comment. Shall I go ahead and allow them to speak now?
Please.
Okay, Alan Hirsch, you are in the meeting and you have 3 minutes to speak.
Thank you very much. This is a very, I'm very impressed by this, Zach. This is a very quality presentation. This is a very ambitious plan. The state certainly has put us put it clearly to say by basically we need to have a 19% reduction in greenhouse gases, VMT, and on top of the EV shift. So many of our cities' CAP plans are dependent on the assumption of fleet conversions to EV. That's basically, obviously this is off the table because clearly that's not a local program. I would suggest that among the strategies you might consider is retrofitting EV chargers into older apartment units. There's no program to do that. That's what people need if they want to buy an EV car. You want to have that 50% shift to EVs. And there's no program to do that. I think if you could basically figure out how to do that and support or subsidize or regulatorily require them to do that, might be a wonderful way of jumpstarting the EV shift. Give the region credit for a shift to EVs, and which would be a massive reduction in greenhouse gases. I hope that's helpful. Thank you for your work and Godspeed. This is very important work.
Thank you, Mr. Hirsch. Any other public comment on this item?
There's no other public comment.
All right, I will bring it back to the committee. Just for comments, I have to tell you, of course, as a school transportation director, I am thrilled to see the conversation about school buses. I was just sitting there calculating in my head with 75,000 students at Elk Grove, probably 45,000 at Sac City, another 40,000 at San Juan, just in this area here, and adding up the districts, there's 250,000 students. And I guarantee you, parents, if they had a way for kids to get to school, they absolutely would take it. And anybody in every one of our cities knows it's the worst traffic we have a couple times a day. So I'm very excited to see that. And our schools are heavily investing in electric vehicles right now, as well as near zero emission with propane and some of the other fuels opportunities. So I'm excited to see that in there. I continue to say it's so strange that school buses have been left out of the conversation. And certainly, in my opinion, there'd be more riders than in some of our other transit options. So excited to see that out there. Any other comments from our committee or staff? All right, seeing none, thank you so much. That was a great presentation. So at this point, we are completed our committee meeting for the day. We have an optional presentation, which is the freight planning in the region that we will be doing at noon in just a couple of minutes here. And so we welcome and encourage you to stay with us. Director Branscombe.
Thank you. My time is precious today. Can I get a quick preview? Can we get a quick preview of what the freight planning is all about?
Yeah, I can give a quick synopsis, but we could definitely share presentation materials with you afterwards. So we're going to do a quick overview. We know freight is sort of a big discussion item here. We haven't talked about it a lot. So we're going to give an update of what some of the work is that we're doing here at SACOG, but also we have some guest speakers that are going to be speaking on some other regional efforts and sort of requirements that are in place right now that we need to be considering as we move forward. Clint and Miguel may have a little more information. Miguel's actually giving the presentation, Director Branscombe. Sorry, I wish I could give you the full.
That's okay. Thank you.
Miguel, do you want to add a little bit since I can't?
Yes, sorry, I'm double muted here. Yeah, Director Branscombe is, for my part at the very least, we're going to go over a study that we're currently conducting, made possible through a Caltrans planning grant, and what we hope to achieve with it, just in really very much in short, the study is looking to identify possible sites for electric and hydrogen charging for freight and goods movement, but not limited to those, of course. Transit may also benefit from these stations. And we're looking at the mega region area, so the 6 counties, Bay Area and San Joaquin County as well. And then following that, we have, as Christina mentioned, we have speakers that will talk about sort of the larger picture and perhaps give some context as to the study that we're doing, but also other efforts that are being made by other agencies and perhaps the state. But happy to answer anything specific you have, but that's just a brief,
So instead of freight planning in the region, it should say hydrogen powered and electric vehicle planning for freight. Isn't that what it is? Is that what you're doing?
For my, short section of this presentation, absolutely. But the speakers will talk about it's sort of a larger picture of freight planning as well. So I don't want to, they really are the stars of the show, and I just wanted to update.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
All right. Any other questions? If not, then we are going to adjourn this meeting. You will use the same Zoom link for the optional presentation that we will begin at noon in just a few minutes. Thank you all for being here. Great to see your faces. And as you know, our next meeting is December, which that just sounds so crazy, but Thursday, December 7th, Day of Infamy, 2023 at 10 a.m. We'll look forward to seeing you all back again. Thank you.
Lynette, you have me down, right? I wanted to make sure I came in a little bit late.
All right. Thank you everyone for joining us today. We're really excited about this. There's a lot going on in the region surrounding freight planning and some freight efforts. And so we wanted to just give a little highlight on some of the things that are going on, including some specific work that SACOG will be doing surrounding the mega region zero emission freight planning effort. So I'm going to turn it over to Sam Shelton and Miguel Mendoza from SACOG to kick it off. Thanks, Sam.
Thanks, Christina. Here, let me share my screen real quick. So today's discussion is about freight zero emission vehicle infrastructure planning for medium and heavy duty vehicles. Freight planning itself would likely take more time than just this lunch. We want to share what SACOG has been doing with a regional partnership and planning grant for the mega region, as well as our partnership with the Energy Commission and SMUD, and how they can share a little bit more about their efforts in this area. So I'll just advance the slide here. So first, we'll talk a little bit. Miguel will share a little bit about the mega region zero emission.
Sorry, Sam, we can't see your screen.
I got to hit the share button again. Just a moment. There we go. Now I'm sharing. So first, we'll kick it off with Miguel Mendoza, who is managing the mega region zero emission medium and heavy duty vehicle study. Next, we'll pivot to statewide efforts and the California Energy Commission's investment programs. So Jim Kinney will chat with you about some of those efforts. And then lastly, we'll go to Eric Cahill with SMUD on some of his efforts on energy development and freight EV planning. And we'll end with questions for our speakers. So next, we'll shift it to Miguel.
Yeah, thank you, Sam. Hi, everyone. So happy to kind of present this work that's ongoing, and I find it very educational and exciting. So we have the Northern California Megaregion Zero Emission Vehicle Medium and Heavy Duty study. And so this is a study that was made possible through a Caltrans grant, and one that really addresses some possible future needs for the region. And so I want to go over briefly what the study, the expanse of the geography of the study, and then what we would like to achieve with it. So the study covers 15 counties, as you can see on the slide here, covers the MTC region, SJCOG region, and the SACOG region, mainly, but not limited to the corridors along 5, 80, 99, 50, the 580, 205. So our usual suspects. And while we're looking at these bounds, we're focusing on both freight and goods movement, but also not limiting it to that, also allowing for transit to have a voice, and folks that may have uses for these locations. And so when we're looking at these corridors, we're looking at possible sites. Our first step really is to have public input, input from our stakeholders, input from the folks that know the region and kind of know the players. When we're looking at possibilities for direct fast charging and also for hydrogen, right? We understand that there's needs, different needs for different use cases. And so the study team will be looking at possible sites through criteria developed by our steering committee, made up of a lot of the supporters of the study in the beginning, including folks from the MTC, SACOG, and SJCOG MPO organizations. And we're really looking at a report in the middle of 2024. And Sam, if you could advance the slide for me, we're going to look at real quickly here the scope of work and our key deliverables. We've got a really, really awesome, at least for me, kind of sequence of events in this slide. But in short, we're going to assess study locations. We're currently doing that right now. And in tandem with that, also looking at creating partnerships and working on criteria so we can prioritize these sites. And I want to again kind of say that these partnerships are one with other public agencies, with the other MPOs, but also with folks that really know this area, including the energy suppliers, and those that will be able to give us details that we wouldn't be able to get otherwise without their help. And then the next steps, of course, and there's a long period of kind of heads down work the project team needs to do. And so what we're going to be looking at in terms of our timeline is in the first or second quarter of 2024, we're looking to have finalized feasibility reports. And these reports are going to look at each site, possibilities of electric and hydrogen, kind of some considerations for both, and sort of what may or may not be done with some of these sites. And then in quarter 2 of 24, finalize fact sheets for each priority location, and of course with equitable engagement plans, which are really important and are part of this study, as well as making sure that we have plans on how to engage the community and landowners, developers on how these sites may be used for these purposes. And then in quarter 3 and 4 is we're going to have the final the final study outlining all of the work that's been done, that would have been done over the past year. And this is sort of the final big deliverable that we want to get out there in Q3 or 4. And then, of course, after that, we'll use the same time period to circulate, make the presentations, let committees and boards and stakeholders know that the report is out. What does it say? you know, what are the recommendations and what have we found through the whole process. And so I do want to repeat again, you know, we're kind of going through that heads down type of period now. We're getting as much input as we can so that we can prepare for more final deliverables, you know, starting in Q1 and Q2 of 2021. But again, this is just kind of a little teaser. We're going to have more details before committees and boards, and kind of giving a lot more meat on the bone to say on this study. But I know that we have two great speakers today, so I'm going to get it to Sam for intros and introductions. But if there's any questions as well, I'm available and here to answer.
Thanks, Miguel. We do have two excellent speakers here today. I'll go ahead and introduce Jim McKinney first and allow him to give his presentation. And then afterwards, I'll introduce Eric at that time. So Jim McKinney is a senior policy analyst with the Fuels and Transportation Division at the California Energy Commission. He's part of a team administering the Clean Transportation Program, the state's primary funding resource for zero emission fueling infrastructure, especially EV chargers and hydrogen refueling stations. Currently, Jim is part of the management team developing federal funding applications for transportation electrification stemming from the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. He served as the Clean Transportation Program's policy manager for many years and was part of the original team that established the Clean Transportation Program in 2008. He has a master's in public policy from UC Berkeley, with a focus on energy and environment. He currently lives in Davis with his family. So I'll go ahead and stop sharing my screen and allow Jim to take over and give his presentation.
Hi, thanks very much, Sam. Greetings to the board. It's my pleasure to meet you at least over Zoom and to share the information I'm going to have on ZEV charging and kind of the nature of ZEV vehicles in general in California. And let's see, make sure this is showing full screen. Just a sec. Where is that little button? There we go. Okay. Is that showing up okay, everybody?
Yes, we can see it, Jim. Thank you.
You can. Okay, great. Okay. Yeah, again, thanks for the opportunity to present today. And I'm going to do kind of a real quick walkthrough through both light duty vehicles and heavy duty vehicles. And I'm going to start with light duty vehicles with the goal of saying it is possible. Transportation electrification is possible and it can happen at scale. So at present, we have had over 1.6 million in light duty ZEV sales in California. And in the second quarter of this year, 2023, 1 in every 4 vehicles in California, every new vehicle was an electric drive vehicle or a plug-in or a fuel cell, but primarily battery electric drive vehicle. And that is just an astounding statistic. And that really puts us out on the leading edge, not just in the US, where we account for about 40% of the light duty ZEV market, but internationally. So this is quite an astounding thing. And when we started this program back in 2008, 9, 10, you may recall we had Nissan Leafs that had a 70-mile range, and we had the Chevy Volt, which was a plug-in and had, I don't know, 30, 40 miles of range initially. So things have really, really progressed since then. The state's policy goals are ambitious. So the current goal is for 7.1 million ZEVs. By 2030, the light-duty vehicle population in the state is about 30 million vehicles. And then by 2035, ICE, so that's internal combustion engine sales, will be phased out and discontinued. So these are some of the policy and regulatory drivers for these programs. The governor's executive orders have focused primarily on reducing climate change emissions, so carbon emissions and methane, et cetera. And these are the policy goals. So 2025, 1.5 million ZEVs. So we're going to meet that. We've already met that. 2035 million ZEVs. And as I said, 2035, only ZEV sales of new light duty vehicles will be allowed. A lot of this is driven by climate change policy, again, at the state level and in the governor's office, but it's also driven by public health standards under the Federal Clean Air Act. And this is where the California Air Resources Board comes in. They have very aggressive regulatory programs for light duty vehicles and heavy duty vehicles or trucks. So I think, as everybody knows, the Central Valley and the South Coast are two of the dirtiest air basins in the country, particularly for NOx and particulates, both of which have severe health consequences for children and the rest of us who live here. So what does it take to support all these light duty vehicles? So by 2025, we're going to need 250,000 chargers. By 2030, 1 million, and by 2035, 2 million. So we've got about 9,000 of these that have been installed to date. 9,000 more have been funded and are in the active planning and construction phases. But we'll still need 19,000 additional DC fast chargers to meet the state's goals. Now I'm going to turn to trucks. And again, I wanted to share the light duty information to show just this is feasible, it's possible, and it's happening at scale through the state's policy objectives and aggressive funding and aggressive regulatory programs. So turning to trucks, so again, I said we had about 30 million vehicles in California. 1 million of those are trucks. So that's 2% of the total vehicle population, but they account disproportionately for on-road carbon emissions, statewide on-road NOx emissions, and then PM 2.5 particulate matter, which again is especially dangerous for what we call sensitive receptors. The policy goals and regulatory drivers for trucks are also aggressive and ambitious. Under the Advanced Clean Truck Regulation from the Air Resources Board, 100,000 ZEV trucks are supposed to be on the road by 2030, tripling to 300,000 by 2035. This was part of the Advanced Clean Trucks and Advanced Clean Fleets. ICE trucks, so again, internal combustion engines, those are to be phased out as feasible by 2045. So as feasible is an important caveat. But the early market, say, targets for these duty cycles are going to be drayage trucks and then off-road trucks. So here's where we are so far on ZEV truck sales. So the sales share is now at 7.5% of new truck sales. And that's a really important figure because with light duty vehicles, the common wisdom from the analysts was once you hit 8% share in new sales, you've kind of reached the top of the hill and you've got good momentum from there. Truck charging needs are important, they're serious, and they're expensive. So this comes from what we call our AB 2127 analytics report. So to support 155,000 trucks by 2030, we'll need 114,000 total chargers. I've got this broken out by what we call low power depot charging and high power public charging. And by that, I mean, as you may know, light duty vehicles charge most efficiently and inexpensively at home, if you're lucky enough to have a home that can support a charger. In the trucking industry, it's similar. So depot or the home basis for these truckers, that is the logical and most cost-effective place to do overnight charging. So you can get by with lower powered chargers. So again, it's 20 kilowatt to 150 kilowatt chargers. But then we'll need 5,500 high power public chargers. And again, these go from 350 to over a megawatt in charging needs. So these are quite expensive, but they're important. It's you kind of give the trucking fleets the confidence to charge at a depot, but then be able to top up the battery as they're out on road. Number of chargers is going to increase quite a bit to 2035. And again, we've got a similar breakout with low power depot charging and then high power DC fast chargers. So here's a few examples of the truck. So the ARB runs the state subsidy program for new truck sales. There are 8 companies that have commercially available Class 8 ZEV tractors. These are just a handful. So you can see Kenworth, Freightliner, those are common names, Volvo, and then new companies like Nikola. And that's all I wanted to say on that one. Let me say a little bit about fuel cell trucks and refueling stations. So there's a bit of a technology, I won't say competition going on, but it's an open question, which is going to become the most efficient way to fuel alternative trucks, alternative fueled trucks for over the road, so the long haul, over the road trucks. The trucks I showed you just before, those have about 300-mile range on a full battery charge. A fuel cell truck can go about 1,000 miles. So many people think that that's the future for long haul trucking, but fuel cell stations are expensive and the fuel is still expensive. So those costs need to come down. At the same time, the cost for battery packs continues to decrease and the energy density or the power that they can have per given size is increasing. So electric trucks are choosing to be, showing to be more feasible than many of us thought. But for fuel cell trucks, the 23 scoping plan from the Air Board calls for about 400 medium stations and 182 heavy duty stations. And that'll increase to over 1,000 for the medium duty truck stations and then 668 for the high stations. And that's a long way from where we are now. So we have 3 operational station truck refueling stations in Southern California and another 22 that are in development in Southern California, the I-5 corridor and the Bay Area. I'm going to go back to electric trucks. So we have some great examples of large capacity truck stations that are in the works, and some are already operational. Forum Mobility has a really large charging station underway in Livermore, and that's going to serve the drayage truck traffic from the Port of Oakland to 580 connecting to the I-5 corridor, and then 80 and 50 over the Sierra. They have an operational 8-truck charging station at the Port of Long Beach. Want EV is another innovator in the truck charging space, and they've got a big station now in Long Beach and several more proposed in Bakersfield, Gardenia, and San Bernardino. Prologis is one of the nation's largest logistics company. They've got a big charging station in LA. Schneider is a major electric charging manufacturer, and they've got a big station underway in El Monte. These are just a few pictures I was able to find. So upper left, a Forum Mobility station, again in Livermore, it's a 96 truck capacity station. And then Want EV, smaller station in Long Beach, but this is operational. So that's pretty exciting to see. The state of California teamed with Caltrans for a tri-state truck charging project between the Mexican and Canadian borders up I-5. And this is to compete for some of the federal funding that Sam mentioned earlier. It's quite an ambitious application. It would be the largest truck charging network in the country if we win the award. 39 stations total. 34 of these will be truck charging stations, and then 5 hydrogen refueling stations. And then lastly, the state is, walking the walk. So there's a lot of money going into this space right now. So 10 billion total in the budget acts from 2021, 22, 23, and now 24. So 10 billion total, about 3.5 billion of that is coming to the Energy Commission for vehicle infrastructure funding. And 1.2 billion of that was specified in the Budget Act for medium and heavy duty truck charging. So you can see the figures here. $250,000 for drayage trucks, $140 for transit buses, $375 for school buses, nearly $500 million for trucks, buses, and off-road equipment, and then a good chunk of change for the ports. And that does it for my slide presentation. And I'll go back to you, Sam, to see when we want to open to discussion or questions. So thanks very much.
Thank you, Jim. I think it's an awful lot of info to keep giving our board before we hit him with Eric's presentation. I think stopping now for questions is just fine. Seeing none for Jim, we can go to Eric next. Eric Cahill, oh, are you still sharing your screen, Jim? Thank you. Eric Cahill guides electric transportation strategy and policy at SMUD, where he develops customer solutions to speed the transition to electric fuel. Since joining SMUD in 2020, Eric developed SMUD's e-fuel commercial EV charging advisory and solutions program, as well as SMUD's pilot commercial EV rate. He has also led the medium and heavy duty zero emission vehicle infrastructure blueprint study, which is in Sacramento and West Sacramento. Prior to SMUD, Eric led the Automotive X Prize competition and conceived and launched the nation's first EV dealer sales training, certification, and support program. He holds degrees in engineering, policy, and business management from MIT, as well as a PhD in transportation technology policy from UC Davis. He currently serves on the board of California Electric Transportation Coalition and drives a Tesla Model Y. Eric, it's all yours.
Great, thank you, Sam. Pleasure to be here. Give me just a second here to get situated, and I'll get right into it. So yeah, it's a real pleasure to be here. I'll be presenting, what we're doing at SMUD with regard to electric vehicles and how that ties into our ambitions for achieving our zero carbon plan at 2030. All right, so quick agenda here. We're going to cover a little bit about our zero carbon plan, the role of electric vehicles in our strategy, and then walk you through some of the findings that we got from our medium and heavy duty fleet grid study, which was part of a blueprint grant. So a little bit about SMUD. We're the 6th largest community owned in the US. Many of you are probably already familiar, but got to kind of run through the basics here in terms of our size, about 2,200 employees. We're at about 50% carbon free. In fact, we're above that now and making good progress. We've got about 645,000 customers or accounts serving about 1.4 million people. So why take action towards zero carbon? Several things motivate us. One is that we, along with regional agencies, recognize we're facing a climate crisis, and we have an F for air quality as well. So local pollution and community impacts, health impacts certainly play a major role. We know that rising temperatures have an adverse impact on the economy, and clearly their impacts on children as well. There's much higher incidence of asthma, and we're looking to, of course, mitigate that. So we're charting a course to clean energy future when our CEO Paul Lau ascended to our chief executive role. He immediately set out this zero carbon plan to achieve absolute 100% zero carbon, not net zero carbon, absolute zero carbon, to set that goal for us by 2030. We're already making our way in that direction. The zero carbon plan, this is kind of the high level version of this. But essentially what our staff did was translate our board's clean energy vision into a zero carbon plan, which is our flexible roadmap for action. The board unanimously approved this back in early 21. And in total, we're expecting to invest about $4.5 billion toward that goal, which also brings thousands of new clean tech jobs to the region. And this plan has about 5 different elements. The big one is basically to drastically reduce emissions. We plan to retire 2 of 5 natural gas generation plants by 2025 and retool our remaining fleet to run on lower carbon feedstocks such as biofuels and other renewable sources. We also plan to expand the use of carbon-free technologies like biomass, hydro, geothermal, wind, solar, etc. Adding at least 2 to 3 times the amount of rooftop solar, for example, than we have today. And the third is focusing on exploring new technology and business models. We're also committed to achieving our zero carbon goal in inclusive ways that attracts innovation, investment and jobs in the region, as well as increasing the opportunity for under-resourced communities to participate in the economic growth. We're also on track to add more than 3,000 megawatts of new renewables and storage, including more than a 1.1 gigawatts by about mid-decade. Yeah, let me jump to the next. This is our, it's a little bit delayed. This is our timeline and how we're using proven clean technologies and bringing those online, as well as introducing new technologies and business models that include public-private partnerships, regional collaborations, such as the 4-agency MOU we signed, to do this together in partnership. These, one thing I will say is that essentially those kind of tried and true technologies will get us so far, but there's about, we're estimating about 10% of carbon that remains needs to come from, that needs to come from innovation in the technology space. So we're looking at two key technologies that offer tremendous load flexibility potential, including virtual power plants, which consist of devices that are often owned by customers that, when operated and managed in a coordinated way, can become an alternative to a conventional utility scale power plant. And those can include electric vehicles, batteries, thermostats, and electric water heaters, for example. And by aggregating their capabilities and flexibility, they essentially can mimic a power plant and provide services that reduce electricity at peak and reducing the need for us to build or buy other resources. So we plan on also developing a flexible program where customers can bring a variety of devices that we use that to help them reduce demand. The other big one is vehicle grid integration. And EV batteries enable load shifting away from peak demand periods, but vehicle at home and vehicle to grid technologies such as Ford's F-150 Lightning, can help us stabilize the grid by either providing energy in the grid during periods of high electric demand, or by taking a portion of surplus renewable energy available to charge a grid-connected vehicle. We anticipate V2G advancements will offer some of the benefits of stationary storage without the added investment of separate stationary battery, even though we are doing that as well, as you may have seen in media reports. We have partnered with automakers as well, school districts, third-party technology vendors to launch residential and commercial pilot programs to test both V1G, which is basically managing charging at the customer site level, as well as V2G technologies, which offer kind of a next level capability of two-way communication and kind of smart syncing between customers and the utility, so that customers actually have the opportunity to participate in energy markets and benefit from it as well. Next slide. And so how does EVs fit into this? So you heard Jim talk about the state's ambitious climate goals and certainly zero emission vehicle goals. So our forecast of light duty growth for the region is to get to, and at least we're targeting, about 288,000 vehicles. 304,000 was a local estimate. This is by 2030 for light duty vehicles en route toward 8 million EVs statewide. I believe that was actually since been revised to something like 7.1 million in 2030. Our SMUD goal is 288,000, which is our kind of portion of that, representing 21% of our population. Our actual population is just, we're actually north of 40,000 since this was back in July. To give you an idea, we closed last year at around, I want to say 32,000, 31,000. We're on course probably for hitting 43 or 44,000 by the end of the year. And that goal, this goal, represents about a 7-fold increase relative to where we're at today. On the fleet side, we may need as many as 18,000 medium and heavy duty EVs. That includes class 2B, so that's why the number is a bit on the larger side. Without that, it's probably closer to 10,000 by 2030. So our enterprise EV strategy actually consists of 6 pillars here. So it includes grid and charging infrastructure and accelerating that to be able to support the load growth we see from EVs. We also want to ensure customers have a great experience. As this market develops, we want to accelerate that and ensuring that customers have a great experience and want to share that experience with others. And new technology and innovation, which is important that we embrace things like V1G, V2G technologies, as well as other technologies to improve things for customers. And we want to ensure equitable access to charging, as well as equity in pricing for charging for our customers across our territory. We want to develop our workforce, as well as ensure that we're collaborating with our regional partners and others, because we can do a lot more with less when we partner and don't duplicate activities. So the other thing I wanted to hit here is our medium and heavy duty, and just hit the highlights of this. This is our medium heavy duty fleet study, which we completed earlier this year, funded by the Energy Commission Blueprint Grant. We wanted to answer several questions here, just do an inventory. What do we have in our territory? The answer we found there was around 24,000, which about a third are owned by independent owner operators, which are very small business, sometimes a single individual or fleets of 1, 2, or 3 vehicles. How fast will they transition over the next 20 years? Where are they going to charge and fuel? How is that going to impact our grid? How will we be ready, and what are the costs involved, as well as what kind of workforce do we need? So for analysis, our role in this was doing a couple things. It was really the grid analysis study. We also hired Guidehouse to do a pretty substantial forecasting effort of ZEV growth for medium and heavy duty fleet vehicles for both ourselves and West Sacramento. And that's what we did, is then to take that data and model it, to see what the impacts would be. And we looked at a few different cases, just our base case, which is our normal load growth, excluding medium and heavy duty charging. We then looked at the on-peak study assumptions, which had about 40% medium and heavy duty charging occurring between our system peak hours of 3 and 11 p.m. And then we looked at a managed peak scenario, which is to see what would happen if we did some conservative estimations of just how much fleets would adopt managed charging technologies as we roll those out. And more than half of medium heavy duty charging shifts to start after 9 p.m. When we see that kind of uptake spread out over several years. So I'll go ahead and move us to the kind of the results that we see, the dark, the gray bands here, the gray bars that you'll see. We're estimating load of roughly 1.1 gigawatts of load ultimately in the next less than 20 years now. But with managed charging technologies introduced, we can cut that almost in half. So I want to also kind of lay out some interesting maps that we produced as part of this. On the left, you'll see that this is our available distribution circuit capacity. And on the right, you will see how that kind of compared against what happens when we introduce managed peak technologies, managed charging, for example, into fleets. And here you're going to see basically the red areas are the ones we're most concerned about. And there's not much of a difference, right? Because in 2023, now, we don't really have any managed charging happening out there. So that's something that will be phased in over years. So you'll see that we're going to have a lot more yellow and red stuff happen on the left than we're going to see on the right as we move to 2026, as we move to 2030, and as we move to 2035 under both the on-peak and managed peak scenario. And I have to say, the on-peak scenario is basically the worst case. In fact, there's roughly a 0 likelihood that that will happen, because that's assuming all these trucks plug in immediately upon arriving at their depot. And we just don't see that realistically happening, because we have things like demand charges, time of use rates, and other things that are very much going to encourage off-peak charging. So what were the key takeaways for us? Well, we found that, with managed charging, medium and heavy duty EV charging requires us building about 55 distribution substation and 6 bulk substations over a 20-year period. And, shifting our load after 9 p.m. reduces that by about 47% and reduces our total cost of system upgrades by 43%. So these are not insignificant numbers. And as a result, we realized we should really bolster our VGI, our vehicle grid integration and virtual power plant efforts, really accelerate these to the extent we can. We want to enable site level charge management as soon as we're able. Then we want to leverage our SMUD e-fuel advisor and solutions program to proactively target key fleets where we, especially in those areas that you saw being yellow or red, some of the grid that and I'll hit the second point, which is want to steer growth toward the least grid constrained areas. And those areas we found to be predominantly, and these are clusters of fleets that are in our Alkali Flats area toward the northwest part of downtown. They are in the McClellan airport area, and they're in the Depot Park former Sacramento Army base area as well. And so we want to target those fleets. We found that although we have thousands of fleets in this territory, it's really about 20, less than 20 fleets that will account for over 90%, well over 90% of the impact on our grid. So it's important we target those fleets, steer them toward those least grid constrained areas. We're adding comprehensive online tools and expert guidance for these, basically at no cost, for these fleets at no cost, so they can contact SMUD and we can help them as a trusted source. We have a great reputation with our customers, and we're looking to leverage that to basically be their guidance, their advisors, if you will, to help them understand what their options are, to help them scope out and select sites as well. And even help them with grants and capturing grants, as well as capturing any kind of EV incentives at the state or local level, even federal level that are out there. And another thing, we're taking a very holistic DER portfolio approach. So, we want to look at not just their solutions for their EVs, but we're also looking at solar. We're considering battery storage as part of that solution as well, in terms of providing an integrated picture for those fleets so they can make an informed decision. So that pretty much concludes my presentation, and I'd be happy to take any questions at this point. Thank you.
Thank you, Eric.
Yeah.
That was a great presentation. There's a lot of detail in both Jim and Eric's presentations about their work at a statewide level, as far as the resources and rulemaking that's pushing us into the future on our alternative fuels for our truck fleets, and how more locally at SMUD, ensuring that there's enough power and infrastructure available and the tools to help turn those fleets over sooner rather than later. Also complemented by SACOG's efforts on the Mega Region ZEV study to help identify those early investments in fast charging and refueling for medium and heavy duty vehicles across the Mega Region and across our interstate highways. So there's a lot going on. It's really exciting. Quite a bit of money to keep pushing trucks to be cleaner and to improve our air quality and emissions. So any questions for Eric, Jim, Miguel, or myself about any of these different efforts?
Sam, I am going to have a quick question, if I may, maybe a little bit off track. My understanding is that especially the commercial electric vehicles are significantly heavier than the current fleet. And I'm as someone who has to maintain many, many miles of roadways within my city, I'm concerned about the wear and tear on the roadways as a result of that added weight. Any thoughts about that?
Jim, you discussed a bit about the difference between battery electric and hydrogen trucks, say versus a drayage versus say a class 8 that might need to be longer range for a hydrogen fuel cell vehicle. But there are still weight limits for trucks, and by axle and the fees that trucks have to pay for that. So, for instance, like a Tesla truck that's Frito-Lay, it's pulling bags and bags of chips. It still can't go overweight too much. I think there's a small allowance there. So I think as far as our pavement is concerned, I am worried about heavier vehicles. But typically the heaviest vehicles that damage our pavement the most come from garbage trucks, not so much the other vehicles that are already rolling across a road. So I think there's some math there about the number of trucks needed to haul all of those commodities if you have more weight that's built into the battery versus say an ice truck and what it's able to tow. But Jim, if you have any other insights into those trade-offs?
Just add a little bit to what you're saying, Sam, because I think you basically covered it. But yeah, so say the trucks I was talking about are the Class 8 tractors, the heaviest haul tractors. So, the gross vehicle weight for those is 80,000 pounds. And so the total cargo that they carry, the total weight of the vehicle, that's not going to change, is my understanding, because it's battery powered. But what will change is the payload that it can carry. So that'll be reduced so that they hit those regulatory requirements for weight levels.
Wouldn't the weight be more concentrated in the tractor of an EV as opposed to spread across the full load?
It says well beyond my area of expertise, but I think that sounds about right.
All right. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Yeah, I would just add that that's probably, something a representative from Caltrans could better address than we could.
I ask, I've got probably approaching easily 100 logging trucks entering my community every day.
Yeah.
And so the former Highway 65, which is now Lincoln Boulevard, going through my community in the course of 3 years, has very large divots being worn into it from those trucks. And I worry about increasing that wear and tear on those roadways. Thank you, Sam. Thank you, Jim.
Thank you. Great question, Director Joyner. I see we have a hand raised from Rich Lozano.
Yeah, thank you, Sam. And I apologize. I came on late just to catch the beginning of the second presentation, but along the lines of, I think that was Paul Joyner that was talking, related to solid waste vehicles with the implementation of organics recycling in our state just this last January. Like a community like mine, we have twice as many, actually 25% more trips by trash haulers in our community. And kind of along those lines, I guess my question is this: do any of the panelists have any information on the progress of the technology for garbage trucks and recycling trucks in the way of electric vehicles? I know our hauler here is testing one out, but according to our garbage company, that technology has been very slow, and the last I heard from them on that was about a year ago. So the question is do we know if there's any increase in technology that's going to speed that process up? Because 2030 is right around the corner.
Well, that's a great question, Director Lozano. I know that Tim Taylor with the Clean Cities Coalition has been looking deeply into trying to figure out different public fleet needs in the vehicles that are available to purchase immediately and for testing. But I haven't heard of any specific fleet turning over quickly, like say like for instance, like a whole bus fleet for a school district. We know we've seen that in Twin Rivers. But Jim, have you heard of garbage truck turnovers to cleaner fuels?
Yeah, they've been in the demonstration phase for for years, and I'm sorry, I'm not familiar with the current commercial state of these vehicles. I would say that electric drive is well suited for something like refuse trucks because of the tremendous torque that you get out of a high power electric motor. So when you've got a lot of start and stop traffic and duty cycles the way we have with refuse trucks, it's really an optimal technology application for ZEV trucks. They also return to base every day, so you can do overnight charging, which is again less expensive and more efficient than daytime fast charging.
And they're also on defined routes too, with very limited mileage typically. So they're also a good fit, at least from a duty cycle profile. Not to mention, just as I was about to start giving my talk today, the garbage truck started rolling through my neighborhood right on cue. Not to mention they're a lot quieter. So, but I do understand that the county of Sacramento anyway, has been exploring, electric refuse trucks for some time now. But I agree, it has been a slow rollout for those vehicles. And as far as I know, they're still in a demonstration mode, prototype mode. So, I'd love to see it happen sooner rather than later. But I don't have like a current timeline off the top of my head that I could share.
Yeah, I appreciate that answer. I just know we contract with a private hauler in our city, and I know one of the concerns was the time, the amount of time during a particular day before having to recharge seemed to be less than what the current vehicles use now. And so their thought was they were going to have to probably under this current technology probably purchase more of those vehicles. And of course it would phase in, right? You wouldn't do the whole fleet at one time, but the technology seems to be lacking in the area of a sustained route as opposed to the current vehicles. And so having drivers having to come back in and charge or take another vehicle to finish the route seemed to be one of the issues. So anyhow, thank you. I appreciate the presentation, and very informative.
So Rich Paul Joyner again. For what it's worth, we've had the exact same experience. We've tried a number of electric vehicle garbage trucks, and our drivers have not been able to complete their existing routes with the charge. And so we've been doing the same head scratching over it. How do we move forward with this?
Yeah, and not to monopolize the conversation, but I do worry in the long term if technology doesn't catch up to the service that we need to provide, that it will then result in ratepayer having to increase their liability, right, for that extra cost, just like we saw with organics recycling.
Yeah, if you've got to increase the number of drivers, the number of trucks, you've got to pass that on to your ratepayers.
Yeah, that's right. The range, we need to see improvements in the range capability of these vehicles. And I know that remains one of the biggest challenges. The battery technology continues to improve, just wish it were happening faster, I think is what most of us would say.
Jim, just as a reminder for folks that are still joining us, the clean trucks, the advanced clean trucks and advanced clean fleets, those rules and regulations, they're going to be hitting public refuse trucks too, right? If the rule applies to them, so they'll still need to meet those deadlines.
I think that's right, but I don't know exactly where, because especially for advanced clean fleets, they, I didn't show this on the slides, but they have kind of specified phase-in periods. So how many trucks by which duty cycle, which weight class, by which date. So, and then again, there's that important caveat for 2045, which is, all truck sales shall be ZEVs, unless not feasible or as feasible. So, and I was going to say, because this question and the other one about garbage trucks is a little bit similar. So CalSTART is just one of the actually one of the countries now, expert think tanks on all things trucking. They've been doing it for a long time, and they run the ARB's HVIP website, the subsidy website for trucks. So an excellent resource for more kind of focused questions like this.
Yeah, I would definitely echo that. Caltrans has got a lot of great information. So does NACFE. That's also a great website as well.
Jim, Eric, I know we're running a little bit short on time here, but any of the links or resources that you've mentioned to those in attendance, I'm happy to pass that on through our board clerk to pass back to folks who have been participating in this chat.
Sure thing.
Yeah, happy to do that.
Any last questions for Eric, Jim, or Miguel or myself about freight, medium, and heavy-duty vehicle, zero-emission vehicle infrastructure planning throughout the region? I've seen no more raised hands. I want to thank our speakers very much for donating their time on their lunch hour to share their knowledge about all the exciting developments that have been happening to transition our fleets to cleaner fuels and electric charging challenges and opportunities. So join me in thanking Eric and Jim. Thank you very much.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you all.